He called up Irene and said, "Hey, why are you doing this to me? You didn't have anything before." And she didn't. That's true. He helped create a character that was terrifically advantageous to her. Irene got upset.
Max Baer Jr., the American actor, producer, and businessman, best known for playing Jethro Bodine on the classic TV show The Beverly Hillbillies, and the last living member of the cast, has finally opened up about what really happened behind the scenes of the show, especially about Irene Ryan, the woman America loved as Granny. Behind the loud laughter and bright smiles,
"You pack up that truck and you and me will skedaddle back home where folks is friendly."
something deeper lived behind the cameras. Who was Irene Ryan when the cameras turned off? And why did Max wait until 88 to finally tell the truth? Join us as we uncover the story no one heard before. The Last Witness. Max Baer Jr. sits in a house that once belonged to someone else's dream, surrounded by photographs that show a world Hollywood has already forgotten. He is 88 years old now, the same age Irene Ryan never reached, and he carries something heavier than nostalgia. He carries the last living memory of a woman the public never truly met. Everyone else who stood on that set, who heard her laugh between takes, who watched her apply the makeup that turned her into Granny, is gone. The directors, the producers, the other cast members, all silenced by time. Max alone remains, and with him, the truth about Irene Ryan that never made it into the interviews, the biographies, the retrospectives that celebrated her without understanding her. For decades, he stayed quiet, not because he was afraid, but because speaking felt like betrayal. Irene had trusted him with pieces of herself she showed no one else, and loyalty meant protecting those pieces even after she was gone. But now, as the years collapse behind him, Max realizes that silence has become its own kind of lie. History is hardening around Irene Ryan, turning her into a symbol, a character, a memory worn smooth by repetition. If he does not speak now, the woman he knew will vanish completely, replaced forever by the role she played. Truth no longer feels like betrayal. It feels like responsibility, like the last thing he can do for someone who gave him more than the world will ever know. What happens when the only witness finally decides that silence is worse than speaking? The lie America loved. America fell in love with Granny Clampett the moment she appeared on screen, a tiny, fierce woman in a bun and apron, armed with a rolling pin and a sharp tongue. She was safe. She was funny. She was exactly what millions of people needed during a time when the country felt unsteady. Granny became a national comfort figure, someone viewers invited into their homes every week, someone they trusted to make them laugh without ever making them think too hard. But comfort has a cost, and for Irene Ryan, that cost was invisibility. The more America loved Granny, the less they saw Irene, until the woman behind the character began to disappear entirely, even to herself. She had created Granny with skill and precision, drawing on decades of vaudeville training, physical comedy, and an understanding of timing that few actors ever master. But the role was so convincing, so complete, that it became a trap. People could not separate the actress from the character, and eventually, neither could the industry. Irene was loved, yes, but she was loved for someone she was not, and that kind of love is its own form of erasure. The smile that paid her bills, that kept her employed, that made her famous, also made her replaceable with herself. She could not afford to step outside Granny's shadow, because the shadow was all anyone wanted to see. The character that saved her career also buried the woman who created it. What if the role that rescued Irene Ryan from obscurity was also the thing that made her invisible? A role taken out of fear. Irene Ryan did not audition for the Beverly Hillbillies because she wanted to play Granny. She auditioned because she had to. By 1962, she was 60 years old in an industry that had already decided 60-year-old women were invisible, and the roles that came her way were shrinking, both in size and in number. Vaudeville was dead, radio was dying, and television belonged to the young and the new. Irene had spent decades perfecting her craft, but craft does not matter when no one is offering you work. The audition was not about ambition, it was about survival, about proving she still had value in a business that measured value by youth and novelty. She walked into that room knowing this might be her last chance, that if she did not get this role, there might not be another one waiting. That kind of pressure changes a performance. It sharpens it, makes it desperate in ways the audience never sees. Granny was not a joke to Irene. It was armor, a way to stay employed, to stay visible, to keep working in the only profession she had ever known. She threw everything into that character, not because she loved it, but because she needed it, because the alternative was disappearing completely. The hunger underneath the comedy was real. The fear of being forgotten, of being discarded, of becoming one more aging actress whose name people could not quite remember. She got the role, and it saved her, but it also locked her in place, turned her into something she could never stop being, because stopping meant risking everything all over again. What does a woman become when this role is not just an opportunity, but her last line of defense against erasure? The mask that never came off. Every morning, Irene Ryan sat in the makeup chair and watched herself disappear. The transformation took time, precision, the application of age that was not yet hers, the construction of a face that belonged to someone else. The grey wig, the plain dress, the absence of anything that suggested Irene Ryan still existed underneath. It was a daily erasure, performed with skill, repeated until it became routine. But the costume also gave her control, and control was something Irene understood better than comfort. When she wore Granny's clothes, she knew exactly who she was supposed to be, exactly what was expected, exactly how to protect herself from the uncertainty that came with being seen as herself. The character became a hiding place, a way to show up without ever being fully present, without ever being fully vulnerable. Max watched her on set and noticed things others missed, the way she held herself differently in costume, the way her voice changed, her posture, even the speed at which she moved. Granny was not just a performance, it was a transformation so complete that Irene seemed to vanish inside it. And when the cameras stopped rolling, when the workday ended, she did not always come all the way back. The fear people saw on set, the sharpness, the insistence on perfection was not cruelty, it was defense. The instinct of someone who knew that one mistake could undo everything. She could not afford to be careless, could not afford to let the performance slip, because the performance was all that stood between her and invisibility. What if Granny was not just a role Irene played, but a place she hid when the world became too dangerous? Max becomes the confidant. Irene Ryan did not trust easily, and she did not trust often, but she trusted Max Baer Jr. in a way that surprised them both. He was young, hungry, still learning how to survive in an industry that had already chewed through better actors than him. And maybe that was why she chose him, because he reminded her of what she used to be, before the armor, before the hiding. She taught him things the other cast members never learned. Not just about comedy or timing, but about endurance, about how to be underestimated and use it, about how to protect yourself when the business decides you are disposable. Their relationship was not warm, it was not sentimental, but it was real, built on something deeper than affection, something that felt like preparation. Max slowly began to realize that Irene was training him, not just to be a better actor, but to outlast her, to survive in a way she was no longer sure she could. She gave him warnings disguised as advice, lessons wrapped in criticism, and he absorbed them without fully understanding what they meant, not until much later, not until she was gone. She never said she was afraid, never admitted that the weight of performing every day was breaking something inside her, but Max saw it anyway, in the moments between takes, in the silence that followed the laughter. She was preparing him for something, shaping him to carry a burden he did not yet recognize. Was Irene Ryan mentoring Max Baer Jr., or was she quietly arranging for someone to remember her truthfully after she could no longer speak for herself? The difficult woman problem. Whispers followed Irene Ryan through the later seasons of the Beverly Hillbillies, quiet comments about her being demanding, inflexible, hard to work with. The word difficult appeared in conversations, in industry gossip, in the unspoken assessments that determine which actors get hired again and which ones get quietly replaced. Max heard the whispers and watched how they changed the way people treated her, the way they stopped listening when she spoke, the way her opinions became problems instead of contributions. He also watched Irene closely enough to see what others refused to, that her so-called difficulty was exhaustion wearing the mask of control, that her insistence on perfection came from knowing that imperfection would be used as evidence that she was too old, too slow, too finished. She could not afford mistakes because mistakes would confirm what Hollywood already believed about women her age, that they were liabilities, that they were past their usefulness. Max saw how control was punished in women in ways it never was in men, how a male actor could be called particular or dedicated, while a woman doing the exact same thing was labeled difficult, unreasonable, a problem. Irene's temper was not ego, it was survival instinct, the refusal to be diminished by people who had already decided she was replaceable. She demanded perfection, because perfection was the only thing standing between her and obscurity, because one bad episode, one weak performance, one moment of visible weakness could become the excuse they needed to write her out, to replace her, to prove she had been past her prime all along. What if being difficult was not Irene Ryan's flaw, but the only strategy she had left to stay alive in a room that wanted her gone? The body starts to rebel. Irene Ryan's body began failing her during the final season of the Beverly Hillbillies, but she hid it with the same discipline she applied to everything else. Pain became something to swallow, fatigue became something to ignore, and illness became another performance challenge to overcome. Max noticed the changes before anyone else did, the way she moved more carefully between takes, the way she held herself still when she thought no one was watching, the way exhaustion settled into her face the moment the cameras stopped rolling. She never complained, never asked for accommodation, never gave anyone a reason to question whether she could still do the job. Complaining meant weakness, and weakness meant replacement. So she pushed through episodes, while her body screamed for rest. She would not allow it. The physical comedy that had made Granny famous required strength, timing, precision, and Irene delivered it all while quietly breaking down inside. Max watched the cost of her discipline turn physical, watched her trade her health for the appearance of invincibility, watched her refuse help because accepting help meant admitting she needed it. She performed through pain that would have sent other actors home, performed through illness that should have hospitalized her, performed because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. Her strength had always been her greatest asset, the thing that separated her from actresses who folded under pressure, but now that strength was becoming denial, a refusal to acknowledge limits that her body was desperately trying to enforce. She believed she could outlast the pain, could push through anything if she just maintained control, but control only works when the body still obeys. How much of herself did Irene Ryan sacrifice on the altar of applause, and when did endurance stop being strength and become self-destruction? The wealth no one understood. Irene Ryan died wealthy in ways that surprised people who thought they knew her, who assumed that an actress playing a poor mountain woman must have lived modestly, humbly, without extravagance. But Irene had been building financial security for decades, quietly, methodically, with the focus of someone who remembered what it felt like to have nothing. The money was not about luxury, it was about insurance, about making sure she would never be vulnerable again, never be desperate enough to accept work she did not want, never be at anyone's mercy. She lived richly off-camera while playing poverty on screen, maintaining an independence that few people in Hollywood ever achieved, especially women her age. The wealth gave her power, the power to say no, the power to walk away if necessary, the power to control her own life in an industry that demanded control from everyone else. She invested carefully, spent strategically, and built a fortune that would outlast her. Max understood that Irene's relationship with money was not about greed, it was about survival, about creating a safety net strong enough to catch her if everything else fell apart. She had lived through vaudeville's collapse, through radio's decline, through decades of uncertainty, and she had learned that the only security in show business was the security you built yourself. Her wealth was built quietly, almost secretly, because admitting you had money made you a target, made people assume you did not need work, did not deserve sympathy, did not understand struggle. So she kept it private, kept it protected, kept it as the one thing no one could take from her. What kind of woman prepares so carefully for the end while everyone around her is still laughing at the beginning? The performance that never ended. Max Baer Jr. spent years believing he knew Irene Ryan better than anyone else, that the trust she placed in him meant she had finally stopped performing, at least with him. But decades after her death, sitting alone with memories that have had time to shift and settle, he realizes something that changes everything he thought he understood. Irene never stopped acting, not on set, not off set, not even in the private moments she shared with him. The illness, the toughness, the careful distance she maintained, all of it was managed with the same precision she brought to Granny. She controlled how she appeared to everyone, including Max, controlling what they saw, what they worried about, what they remembered. Every interaction was calculated, not coldly, but carefully, the way someone arranges their legacy while pretending they are just living their life. Her collapse on stage during a performance of Pippin was not recklessness. It was inevitability, the final scene in a script she had been writing for years. Max now understands that Irene knew her body was failing, knew she was pushing beyond what was safe, knew that continuing meant risking everything, but she chose to continue anyway, not because she was careless, but because she refused to end her career quietly, in a hospital bed, forgotten by everyone except the people paid to remember. Irene did not want to be saved. She wanted to finish on her terms, wanted her final performance to be exactly that, a performance witnessed, remembered, impossible to ignore. She was not choosing death, but she was refusing to live quietly, refusing to fade away the way the industry expected aging actresses to fade. Control mattered more than comfort. Legacy mattered more than survival, and if the price of that control was her life, then she had already decided the price was worth paying. What if Irene Ryan's final act was not a tragedy of exhaustion, but the carefully designed ending to a performance that began the moment she first stepped on stage? The exit she planned. Irene Ryan's death came 6 weeks after her collapse. 6 weeks spent in a hospital where control slipped away from her for the first time in decades. She never regained consciousness, never spoke again, never had the chance to perform one final scene. Max visited when he could, sitting beside a woman who had spent her entire life refusing to be still, watching her body shut down while machines kept rhythm with what was left. The silence she left behind was heavier than any applause she had ever received, denser with meaning, harder to escape. Max kept replaying their conversations, searching for clues he had missed, warnings he had ignored, moments when she might have been asking for help without actually asking. But the more he remembered, the more he realized that Irene had never wanted help, had never wanted rescue, had only wanted someone to understand that her choices were hers. He began to question whether she had ever truly rested, whether there had ever been a moment when she allowed herself to stop being strong, stop being vigilant, stop performing the version of herself that kept the world at a safe distance. Even in their most private conversations, even when she seemed vulnerable, Max now wonders if that vulnerability was just another role, another carefully constructed version of Irene Ryan designed to make him feel trusted while still protecting her completely. Her death reframed everything, turned what looked like dedication into something darker, something that resembled sacrifice but felt more like refusal. She refused to be weak, refused to surrender, refused to let anyone else write her ending, and the cost of that refusal was everything. Did Irene Ryan ever get to stop being strong? Or did strength become the prison she built to keep herself safe from a world that never stopped demanding more? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.